Today's book of the day is The Third Door by Banyan. And this book was actually recommended to me by a friend, and I honestly didn't know much about the author before I read this book. And he's an entrepreneur, but he wasn't someone that I had seen videos of online, or someone that I followed on Instagram or wherever. So I kind of went into it with open expectations, but the subtitle of it is The Wild Quest to Uncover How the World's Most Successful People Launch Their Careers. And throughout this book, Alex tells these stories of how he wanted to get wisdom and advice from some of the most successful people on earth at the time. And his list included people like Steven Spielberg, the director, Tony Hsieh, who started Zappos, Bill Gates of Microsoft, Warren Buffett, and Larry King of his own show. So he really had a wide variety of people that he wanted to connect with and that he actively sought out. And while he wasn't able to meet, and interview every single one of these people, he was able to basically have interactions with each of them. And this is the first lesson that seems really relevant to all of our lives, because by being intentional with what Alex wanted, he put down on paper a list of people that he wanted to reach out to and connect with. And by doing that, by making it real, by putting it down on a physical piece of paper, it seems like that was one of the factors in his success, rather than just having these things in his head. Once he puts it down on a piece of paper, it's one step further into putting these things out into the universe. And some of the stories he tells are funny because when he went to meet Steven Spielberg, it was at an event at the college he was at out in California, and students weren't allowed to go to the event, but he kind of snuck his way in and asked Spielberg a question on his way out, asking if he could interview him. And Spielberg was notorious for not giving interviews, and he kind of stopped before getting into his car, and he said, I think I will give you the opportunity. I'll give you a maybe. And Alex was super excited about that. Spielberg basically told him to call his office and they would schedule something. And although he wasn't able to ultimately get the interview and was reprimanded by the organizer of the event, it goes to show that just by putting ourselves out there and making an ask, we're often we can often be pretty surprised by the response. Because I think most of us would be, and myself included, would be intimidated to ask someone like Steven to be able to interview him when he doesn't give interviews. Yet by taking the risk and taking the chance, you never know what someone's going to say. And a lot of times I think we'll be pleasantly surprised by the results we get just by putting ourselves out there. And it's an asymmetric opportunity. It's low downside. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? He gets yelled at, cursed at. He feels weird for a little while because he was rejected. But I mean, the upside is huge. It could change your life. Just meeting one single person that you come into contact with. So that lesson of putting yourself out there goes a long way, and it continues because later on in the book, he talks about visiting Tony Hsieh at Zappos, and he had asked Tony if he could shadow him for the day, and see, as the CEO of Zappos, what he does on a day-to-day basis, and see if he can glean any insight from following him around and seeing how he operates and how he works. And what was really telling at the end of the trip, and I'll pull up the quote for you here, is at the end of the day, he's leaving, and at the end of the night, he goes over to Tony to say bye. Thanks him again, because Tony actually let him shadow him for 2 whole days. And he says to him, "I know this might sound weird, but why don't you let your employees shadow you?" He asked Tony. And the book says, Tony looked at me blankly and said, "I'd be happy to, but no one ever asks." And that is extremely telling, because he has thousands of employees working for him, and if any single one of them had shown the initiative or shown that they really wanted to speak with Tony, or even shadow him for a day, which is really invaluable, because you get more than just wisdom from someone when you're able to follow them around for a day or two, like Alex was able to, because you not only get to see what they do on a day-to-day basis, how they might schedule their days, things of that nature, but you also get to see the things that they won't share in an interview because it just doesn't come to their mind. Their mannerisms, the way they interact with people, their thought process. Sometimes you can get insights into that because they'll tell you about it and explain things to you afterwards. So that's really the ultimate superpower, is being able to shadow people that are ahead of you, because you don't just get knowledge, you also get actionable things that you can do in your own life, personal and in business, by shadowing someone. And at the top of his list was Bill Gates, and at the end of the book he is able to meet with him, and before that he ends up having several lunches with Larry King, and he speaks to a lot of other interesting characters, including this one gentleman named Common. And Alex had gone to him for advice on how to succeed in life, and Common tells him, I've had a lot of young people come to me expecting that somehow I could give them insights on how to succeed. Let's say there's a 1 in 100 chance you're going to get something right. If you're willing to do it more than 100 times, you start to approach the probability that eventually you're going to get it right. Call it luck, call it tenacity. You will eventually get it if you exhaust all your efforts. And this is something that I think we often need to be reminded of, because if someone tells you or tells me that there's only a 1 in 100 chance that something's going to happen, a 1% chance, you could take that as a discouragement. And whether it's signing your dream client, or asking that girl or guy out on a date, or succeeding at a sport that you're trying to be better at. If someone tells you there's only a 1% chance you can succeed, on one hand you might think I should pack it in and there's no point in doing this. But on the other hand, you can think to yourself, well, if I try this 100 times, I'm going to succeed, because 1 in 100 times you're going to get it right. And it's tough to think that way, because our minds are so oriented towards looking at the number as it is. 1 in 100 is not a high likelihood of success. But if you think about it in terms of the downside, if you do fail, asking someone to mentor you, or asking someone if you could take them out to lunch or take them out to dinner on a date, again, the worst thing that happens is that they say no, or that you're temporarily embarrassed. But the upside of any of these things is massive. You could meet your future wife or husband, you could meet a future business partner, a mentor that you'll have for years. So even though it can be discouraging to look at things when they don't work, if you expand your time horizon enough, and you take enough shots at the target, eventually you're going to hit exactly what you want. And of course, it isn't always the case. Some things, will never happen. I'm never going to be able to fly, but, or pigs won't be able to fly, that's for sure. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to do the things that are possible, that we've seen are possible, because other people have done them. And oftentimes, the only thing that separates you or I from achieving those things is, putting in the time, energy, and effort to make them happen. And it's tough at the beginning too, because we're often not as good as we'd like to be at those things. But the only way to become excellent at anything is to do it over and over and over again. And one final lesson I'll leave you with from this book is when Alex also had a chance to have lunch with Steve Wozniak, who famously co-founded Apple Computer with Steve Jobs back in the day. And it was weird because Alex, was asking Wozniak, questions about his success in business and in life, and famously, Steve Jobs was much more financially wealthy than Wozniak was, and he was the face of Apple. He got all the press, and Wozniak infamously, only wanted a certain position in Apple. He didn't want to go above, the engineering level because that's what he enjoyed doing, and it certainly hurt, his ability to make, billions of dollars at the end of the day. But that wasn't what Wozniak wanted, and this was an important lesson that he imparts on Alex, because he says, when I was a kid, I had two goals for my life. The first was to create something with engineering that changes the world. The second was to live life on my own terms. Most people do things because that's what society tells them they should do. But if you stop and do the math, if you actually think for yourself, you'll realize there's a better way to do things. And Alex asked him, is that why you're so happy? And Wozniak says, exactly. I'm happy because I do what I want every day. And Wozniak's success, I think, obviously Steve Jobs beat him in the wealth department, but Steve Jobs, also was the wealthiest man in the graveyard. He didn't live long enough to see himself use all that wealth or, use all of his knowledge to expand Apple further. And, Wozniak seems like he took the time to sit down and to think about what he actually wants, which in today's day and age is especially difficult because we're bombarded from all sides, with information that's overwhelming and makes it really difficult for us to take any time aside to think. So, one thing you could do is, just, it doesn't even have to be every day, but, once a week, once a month, if you just take a notepad and sit in a room away from your phone, away from the TV, away from your computer, away from any distractions, and set a timer for 10-15 minutes and just think and write down what comes to your mind on a piece of paper. And it's also important to ask the question that Wozniak asked himself years ago, which is, what is it that I even want? Because sometimes you'll realize that you're doing things because society tells you that that's good or that's what other people are doing. But at the end of the day, what's the point of doing those things if you yourself aren't satisfied by them or they don't make you happy at the end of the day? So, taking Wozniak's advice and, asking yourself, is that what would make me happiest when you're thinking about the things you're doing or the things that you plan on doing, is super helpful, not only in business, because, if you dislike what you're doing every day, it's going to be very difficult to be good at it. And in your personal lives as well, if you're doing things that make you unhappy, I mean, it's not a recipe for success, that's for sure. So I hope you got something out of today's book of the day from Alex Banyan, The Third Door, and I hope you're looking forward to our next episode tomorrow. Thank you.